Happy Monday, everyone. It's Dr. Plague again, here with more cozy horror to really ease you in to a brand new week. Let's see if we can't get you started with some great stories and some great times spent together. The topic of discussion today is strange and often unexplained creatures. So let's start off strong with a little night work at a strange factory. Let's talk about the night shift at Braxton Moore.
The job wasn't fancy, but it would pay the bills, and that was what I needed right then. I'd graduated high school a few years ago, and no sooner had I thought about entering the job market than COVID hit and shut a lot of the world down. Suddenly, most of the things I would be qualified to do would make me a non-essential worker. So I decided to make my mom happy by going to college. She wanted me to take the time and get a degree or a certificate or something, but after 2 years and 2 changes of major, I had very little to show for my efforts. My counselor, after scowling at my file for a few minutes, finally sighed and said something to me that I'll never forget. Some people do well in school. To some people, this is a chance to engage with peers and better themselves. But this isn't the case for everyone. I feel like you may be trying too hard to be something that someone else wants you to be. Why not go out and live a little? Come back when you decide what you might like to be. Mom didn't much care for that answer, and she said if I was planning to drop out of school, then I would need to help with the bills. Dad was retired, and Mom was getting ready to retire. The last thing they wanted was another useless mouth to feed. So, started looking for a job. But the list of potential positions wasn't very long. I didn't want to flip burgers or wash cars or something I'd have to fight high school kids for. But I didn't have the skills for anything like maintenance work or coding. I didn't have the job experience for anything that wasn't entry level, and when they asked if I'd be willing to work nights, I said I would. When the site I was using sent me a list of potential jobs, I grimaced at the 6 names. Not a lot of options, but I suppose there had to be something there. There were 2 fast food jobs, so they went out. There was a part-time janitor position, but I was looking for something full-time. That left a job with a cab company, a bagger at Publix, and an assembly line job for Braxton Moore. That one surprised me because you didn't often see entry-level positions open there. Braxton Moore was an air conditioner company, one of the biggest ones in the region, and it was a place where people usually stayed for quite some time. I was in for a further surprise when I read the hours. Shift is 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Candidates will need to be able to stand for 3+ hours, be required to work with a particular instruction and minimal breaks, and will not be allowed to leave for the entirety of the shift. Benefits will be from day one, and pay will be very competitive. Looking at the projected pay rate, I saw it was very competitive. That made up my mind. I sent the message to the recruiter, and about an hour later, I had an interview the next day. So that's how I came to be sitting in the offices of Braxton Moore Industrial at 11:30, listening to how I could find fulfillment as an assembly line worker. The work isn't glamorous, but the demand for products has become so great that BMU has decided to open up the facility to offer a night shift position. You'll arrive at 9:30, be at your station at 10, work till the bell rings at 6 a.m. You'll be given 2 30-minute breaks, one at 1 and one at 4. And you'll be expected to be at your station at all times. Understand? I nodded, telling him it sounded pretty cut and dry, and he chuckled as he said it was as easy or as hard as I decided to make it. There is one important thing you should know about the job before you take it. The owner, Mr. Moore, likes to keep the lights off after the second shift leaves. There are lights at the station, but the floor lights are cut off at 10 as a cost-saving measure. You aren't afraid of the dark, are you? He asked, making it sound like a joke. I told him I wasn't, and he seemed to like that. I answered a few more questions, and the interviewer seemed impressed. He shook my hand and told me to expect a call back. But a week later, I was milling around the break room as I waited for the others to arrive. A few others showed up, maybe 5 or 6, and it looked as if they were keeping the crew small. When a lady in a pantsuit arrived for orientation, I expected her to comment that it had been a slow hiring cycle. But no, she said it looked like everyone was there and told us to have a seat so we could get started. You will be part of our new night line. You will be placed at a station, and it will be your job to assemble the products as diagrammed. Your station has its own purpose, and as posted, you will be working in 3-hour shifts between breaks. When you're at your station, I must ask that you not leave. The floor is dark, due to the lights being on timers, and you could get hurt if you wander onto the manufacturing floor. What if we have an emergency or something? Asked a girl a row ahead of me. There's a phone at your workstation, but we do ask that you leave your cell phones in the lockers. Here, she said, indicating the locker at the back of the room. Locks will be provided, but if you want your own, we understand that too. I must impress upon you the importance of not leaving your workstation. It's very dark on the work floor, and you could get hurt or killed if you go exploring on your own, We went over a few things, mostly the general idea of AC manufacture, but that line kept sticking in my head. Was the machinery on while the lights were off? The cost-saving measure had to be negligible when compared to the cost of running the machines. Wouldn't it make more sense to just shut down at night? I was still thinking about it as they led us out to the floor and showed us the stations. They were little plexiglass booths with an open back, and the conveyor belt would send the parts you needed to your station for assembly. It was pretty straightforward, and I could see diagrams at each station that showed you how your pieces snapped in and how each station did its part. The second shifters were kind enough to show us what each station did, telling us that each one was pretty much the same in the long run. I found myself hanging out around Station 4 for the most part, and when the bell rang at 10, I stepped inside and figured I'd stay here. The guy who had been showing me the ropes, his hand-stitched name tag reading Russ, shook my hand in passing, wishing me luck on my first night. Something was stuck to my palm when he left, but he walked off too fast for me to call out to him. Then suddenly, the others were scrambling to get to their positions, and we were getting ready to start our first night. They kept the belt running pretty slow that first night, but just as some of us started getting the hang of it, the lights went out with a resounding chunk, and we were left in individual pools cast by the safety lights over our workstation. Some of them yelled in surprise when the noise came, but I was kind of expecting it. The lights actually went out at 11 p.m., I made a note, and wouldn't come on till 6 a.m. 7 hours of working in the dark. What fun. Don't be alarmed, came a voice over the PA. You were told that the lights would be going off. Continue to work, and everything will be fine. There was some nervous chit-chat between stations, but they all pretty well went back to work. We had probably assembled about 8 or 9 air conditioners by the time 1 a.m. came, and when someone with a flashlight made a noise behind me, I jumped a little. "Break time," said a pudgy security guy with a bright light. He and another guy led us all to the break room so we could stretch our legs and get a snack. And as we ate our crackers and drank sodas, we got to know our fellow line workers a little. There were 3 girls, Maria, Lisa, and Tracy, and Kenny, a haggard-looking guy in his mid-40s, and Lewis, who was around my age. Kenny and Lewis and I sat together as we discussed what had brought us to this point in our lives. Kenny had been laid off along with the rest of the paper mill in the next town over, and Lewis had been part of a tech startup that had fallen hard. Both of them had suddenly found themselves unemployed and looking for something to pay bills with, which had led them here. "I tell you, though," Kenny said, his voice sounding spooky as it graveled out, "I can't wait to get back to the middle or day shift. Working in the dark is downright spooky. I could swear something was looking at me the whole time I was working out there." Kenny had taken the first booth, having the most experience with assembly line work, and he had the most floor space available behind him. From the 4th booth, I really couldn't see much with all the shadowy machinery behind me, but I imagined Kenneth, or whoever had taken a spot number 2, would have a front row seat for every clank and grind of the gears and bits. "Might be good to invest in some ear protection," I joked, but Kenneth just shook his head. "Nah, I don't reckon I'd feel any better if I couldn't hear anything. Beneath all them moving bits, it's almost like I can hear something moving out there. Like something with claws scrabbling on the ground. You guys hear anything like that? Like a weird noise under the machinery?" Both Lewis and I shook our heads, and Kenny got a weird look on his face as he looked into the mouth of his soda can. It's like rats or something, I don't know. It's hard to be out there with so little light, is all I'm saying. They took us back on the floor not long after that, but what Kenny had said must have stuck in my head. I found myself listening for the scuttling as I worked. The work was honestly a little mindless. AC units are like high-end computers, at least the ones we were making, and the process was kind of idiot-proof. As long as you were paying attention and the damn unit was facing in the right direction on the belt, you were pretty much assured to put it where it needed to be. The units were coming in a little quicker now, and when the box of parts I had ran empty, I pushed the button next to the station to stop the line so I could get another box of parts. After a while, I would push the green button when I had 10 left so the line wouldn't stop because of me. The line still stopped sometimes, but I knew that if I could be as efficient as possible, it would go farther to getting on the day shift. I had hit the button at about 3 a.m., my belly really looking forward to that next break at 4, when the line stopped altogether and someone down the way dropped their box of parts loudly. I heard parts and pieces scatter, the worker apologizing to the guard who had brought it to her, and as the sound of the line died down again, I looked into the gloom of the factory and thought I heard something out there. There was definitely the clang of metal and the whir of moving parts, but there was something else out there too. A smaller sound, a skittering sound, and as I fixed on it, I saw something else, a pair of coal red eyes that looked at me through the gloom. We locked eyes for a moment. Whatever possessed those eyes very interested in my attention, but when the little bell went off to signify the line was going again, I turned back to get my parts in before it moved on. I glanced over my shoulder again, looking for the source of the eyes, but they were already gone. By 5:30, the light was coming in through the window, and when 6 a.m. hit, the lights came on just as loudly as they had gone off, signaling the end of the work night. We filed out as the day shift filed in, and the lady in the pantsuit from orientation told us we had built about 60 units last night. The general expectation is 300 in a 24-hour period, but that was a full line. You should be very proud of your efforts, but tonight, your target will be 100 units, since you know what you're doing now. Lewis and I walked out talking, Kenneth saying he had parked out front and going the other way, and as I climbed into my car and headed home, I was actually looking forward to hitting the line again tonight. It wasn't hard work, just tedious, and it was honestly kind of nice to have something easy to do. I knew the pressure would be on tonight to make more and keep the line moving, but I felt sure that we could manage it. I had already forgotten about the weird eyes as I pulled into the front yard and headed up the stairs to sleep, but when I put my hand in my pocket, I remembered the scrap of paper that Russ had handed me the night before. Wasn't sure what I expected, but it wasn't the scrawl that was written on the little paper square. 1. If you hear scraping from the dark, don't turn around. 2. If you smell death or rotten meat, don't look and don't stop working. 3. This one's the most important. If you see the eyes looking at you, look away as fast as possible. I looked over the note a few times, trying to decide if it was a trick or something. It would be up some of these guys' alley to try to run a goof on the new guy, and I figured maybe that was what this was. Russ had seemed pretty well put together. Normal, I mean, but I guess this might be just something people did around here. I drifted off, thinking about those eyes, thinking about how maybe the line had saved me from something terrible. But what? I decided I needed answers, but first, I needed sleep. I came in around 9 that night, getting there a little earlier than I meant to, and found a familiar face in the break room. Russ was nursing a Dr. Pepper and smiled as he saw me come in. "Hey, it's my replacement. How did 4 treat you last night?" He pulled out a chair at his table, inviting me to sit. "Pretty good," I said, getting my own soda as I took a seat near him. "I was wondering if you could tell me anything about this," I said as I pushed the folded note towards him. He inhaled, putting his hand over the note as he grimaced around. "I think I'd like a smoke. How about you, kid? Can I interest you in a smoke?" I didn't smoke, but I nodded anyway and followed him out to the smoking area. The night air was bracing as we stood on the veranda of the break room, Russ lighting up as he glanced around. "You get a chance to show that to anyone?" "No." "Good. Don't. especially not anyone from management. Why not? It could get me in a lot of trouble, but I hate that they don't warn the new guys about, what's out there. I asked him what was out there, and he exhaled smoke bitterly. Before I worked the second shift, I was on the night shift. It's not brand new, as they would like people to think it is. It's been going for years. It usually operates through word of mouth or through particular agencies. They say, if you exemplify yourself on nights, it's a fast track to second shift. When I called you my replacement, you see, I wasn't kidding. I'm preparing to go to day shift. The brass ring as far as anyone around here is concerned. I've earned it, though. I've done 5 years on second shift, just waiting for an opening. But I've never forgotten the nights I spent on that dark floor as I assembled AC units by the little light overhead. It was your first night, but I'll go ahead and assume you probably saw something. I wanted to deny it for some reason, but I ended up just nodding and telling him about the eyes. He nodded and kind of blew smoke out of his nose. Yeah, the eyes. How many sets did you see? Just one, I told him, not really liking the question. Good. One's okay. If you see 2 sets, one above the other, look away immediately. If you see 3 sets, well, it's probably already too late by then. Too late for what? I asked, not liking all the secrecy. I don't know, but it's not something you want to mess with. It takes people sometimes, people who really see it or do something it doesn't like. You can hear it when it's getting close. Its claws or whatever are sharp, and I've seen the maintenance guys trying to buff them off the floor sometimes. There's a smell to it as well, like rotten garbage or old meat, but you only really smell it if it gets close. The eyes are the most important part. Don't look at it if you can help it. It doesn't like being looked at. But if you're looking and it opens its 3rd set of eyes, it's probably too late anyway. At that point, don't blink, because the second you blink, it'll get you. I heard the higher-ups were impressed with you and the guy in Spot 1. Get through your training period, and they'll likely bump one, if not both of you, up to mid-shift. Take the promotion if they do. Get off nights as fast as you can, and don't look back. It's a death trap. A trap that gets closer to killing you the longer you... The door opened then, and the woman in the pantsuit stuck her head out, smiling at Russ and I. There you are. Everyone's ready to get going. Russ, I trust you aren't trying to scare the new guy off. Russ smirked, pitching his cigarette away as he turned to go back in. Just showing the newbie the ropes, Miss Baker. He's got a good head on his shoulders. I want to make sure he makes it to mid-shift. As do we all, the woman said, smiling at Russ as he took his leave. That night was rough. We were going from the time we got there, till the accident happened at 2 a.m. The lady had told us flatly that she was giving us a goal of 100 units by 6 a.m., and she assured us that she was serious. If you are moved onto the other shifts, there will be daily goals to meet. Bonuses are given to shifts that meet their goals, but layoffs often follow the ones that don't. Don't get laid off because of dilly-dallying. By our first break of the night, we had made about 50. We all sat together that night, talking about how if we kept it up, we'd make our goal by the time the next break came around. Everyone was excited, wanting to make our goal on the second day. Wasn't as if it had never been done before, but we were excited to make it happen, nonetheless. Kenneth was quiet as we talked, though, shivering a little as he sat and munched the sandwich he'd brought for dinner. It was clear that something was on his mind, but whatever it was, he had no intention of sharing it with us. We came back at about 1:30 and set to our task. We were making good time, sending them down as quickly as we could, but that's when we heard the noise. It was different than the sound when the lights went on. This one was a lighter sound, like the buzzing just before the lights go out. I glanced up, my eyes seeing the lights overhead buzz, and then suddenly they went out. Not just mine, but all of them went out, all at once. It was like a breaker had been thrown, and the voice of the security guy came overhead and told us to calm down while they got the lights back on. I heard the chit-chat erupt further down, even the winking of an illegal cell phone as the flashlight came on. But I kept my eyes on the line. I remembered Russ telling me about the eyes and the claws, and I was afraid to look too hard into the shadows. I heard something as the machinery powered down slowly, a noise on the edge of hearing. I heard the light scamper of nails, and my spine nearly tingled. As the machines came to a halt, the clicking sounded thunderous without the noise to cover it. It was quiet, like mice feet, but sounded to me like fingernails walking across bricks. It clipped along like a whole procession of fingers, and I wondered if there was more than one. I kept my eyes forward, the clicking going past, and that's when I smelled the smell. Russ hadn't done it justice. It was like roadkill in the sun, like the piles of guts my grandpa used to leave outside the slaughterhouse after he butchered a deer. And as it moved past, the cloud settled over me. It took everything I had not to gag, and as the cloud went away, I heard others comment on it. When someone further down the row screamed, I turned in time to see the lights come back on and see Lisa pressed against the wall of her workstation, hyperventilating. The security guys came in a hurry as her screams peeled up towards the ceiling, and the assembly line ground to a halt once again. After some quiet talk, Lisa was escorted off the floor, and we had to figure out how to continue without her. Tracy agreed to work both stations, but Tracy hadn't been fast to start with, and our productivity slowed and lost momentum. We managed another 30 in this way, Tracy and Lewis swapping out from time to time, and we ended our night with about 80 units. The woman seemed pleased that we had made it so close after losing a person, but when I saw Lisa in the parking lot after I got out, I realized I wanted to know what had set her off. Had she been sitting out here for the last 4 hours? Did she not have a car of her own? "You okay?" I asked, coming to sit beside her at the bus stop. She nodded, sniffling a little as she looked at her shoes. I don't think I'm coming back tonight." "Why?" I asked. We had never been close. I don't think I'd ever actually spoken to her before now, but she seemed willing to talk as we sat on the cold bench by the bus stop. "I had my phone out, using the light. I knew I shouldn't, but I took it on the floor. I turned around, wanting to take a picture to post later, just a joke post. But when I snapped the picture, I found something else. It was shadowy. I couldn't see it very well, but it was terrible," she said with a shudder. "It was like a scuttling tumor with too many teeth. Its eyes were like little pits, devoid of life. I don't know what I saw, but it made me feel like I was a little girl again, listening to the monsters under my bed." I offered to take her home, but she said she would rather just wait on the bus. I sat with her until it got there, and that night, Lisa wasn't there. There was someone new waiting for us, a young kid who looked fresh out of high school, and we welcomed Nick onto the assembly line. He took up Lisa's old spot, bopping his head as he listened to music at his station, and was never bothered by the problems that Kenneth and I seemed to be plagued by. I forgot to mention that Lisa wasn't the only casualty of the night shift, it seemed. Kenneth didn't stop coming to work. He had bills to pay and people depending on him, but he just got more and more haggard looking as the week went on. He clearly wasn't sleeping, and he seemed anxious every time he had to return to the floor after breaks or at the start of shift. This went on till Wednesday of our third week. It went on until Kenneth snapped. It was another night of working the assembly line, making AC units as fast as we possibly could. We were easily meeting our 100 units a night goal and had even completed 125 a few times. The higher-ups were impressed with their new prospects, but the word was that Kenneth and I were the standouts. The talk was that at the end of the first month, Braxton Moore was planning to extend jobs to the standouts on the floor, and my name was on the list next to Kenneth's. If he had just held out for another couple of days, Kenneth would have been free of the demons that haunted his night. It was about 3:30 in the morning, and the noises had been worse than usual. The skittering had gone back and forth since 8 o'clock, and the smell had been something constant. Security had claimed there was a dead raccoon in the vents or something, but I think most of us suspected it was something else. More than a few of them had noticed the smell, if not the clicking nails, and the eyes that sometimes found you were hard to ignore. We were all doing our best to ignore it when Kenneth suddenly loosed a primal scream and made us all jump. "Go away! I'm sick of this! I'm sick of all of this! I'm gonna kill you!" he yelled, fists balled as he stalked into the darkness. He ran off into the gloom, and before I could think better of it, I went after him. Lewis and Kenneth had become something like friends to me in the last few weeks, and I couldn't let Kenneth go off and get himself killed. I ran after him, the dark closing around me, but I had stumbled about 50 feet on the floor and hit my head on something as I went down hard. I lost a couple of minutes, but I realized how much I had nearly lost when my vision cleared. There were 2 sets of open eyes hovering over me, and the third had just slid open. The creature towered over me, standing on a body covered in long, twitching fingers, grinning down at me with a mouthful of needle-sharp teeth. His body was lumpy like a giant potato, but his teeth were just as sharp as Lisa had said. His eyes were burning pits with smoldering coals, all of them staring at me as I lay on my back, my head throbbing. I nearly lost before I even started, but I remembered before the pain could force a wincing blink out of me. I held the creature's nightmare gaze, the eyes smoldering into me like hot coals, and I could feel it regarding me as its heat dried my corneas. I had always been pretty good at staring contests when I was a kid, but this one took the cake. It probably made a difference that my life was on the line, but in a lot of ways, this was just another bully trying to stare me down. Nothing mattered at that moment. Not Kenneth, not the job, nothing but beating this thing and proving it could be done. If I lost, then I'd never know it. If I won, however, I'd be the only one who would know, since no one would believe me. It felt like we stared at each other for hours, but when all 3 sets of eyes finally blinked, I breathed in a sigh of relief. It clicked away on those nubby legs, the ends likely tipped in claws or something, and when I saw flashlights and heard people calling my name, I started backpedaling towards them. The security guys were as relieved to see me as I was to see them, and they helped me to the break room to get the little gash on my head seen about. They told me to take it easy for a while, and I was glad for an excuse to breathe. After what I had just been through, a little break was the best I could hope for before having to suck it up and go back to the floor. The woman in the pantsuit came in half an hour later, and after finding everyone in the break room, told us to go home for the night. They still hadn't found Kenneth, and didn't sound like they expected to. She asked me to stop before I could leave, calling me into a nearby office before handing me a manila envelope. Inside was an offer for the second shift, something I'd been expecting to see. "The higher-ups are impressed with your work, and except for leaving your post tonight to try to get Kenneth, they were impressed with your ability to follow expressed rules. They want to offer you a spot on the mid-shift, if you want it." That was about a year ago, and I've been working mids ever since. The shift is as different as, well, as night and day, not to sound too cliche. With the floor lit up, it's easy to see all the things that looked scary in the dark and sort out all the moving parts as just machinery or belts or something else. I haven't heard the clicking or smelled the smell since starting on mids, but sometimes I still see those eyes. It isn't anything consistent, but it's more often than I would like. Sometimes if you look up into the mouth of the industrial fans near the ceiling, just before shift change, you can see a glowing pair of eyes just waiting for the lights to go out. It fears the lights for some reason, and it won't come onto the floor until the lights are off and the night shifts are bathed in the protective bubbles. I won't work nights anymore, and no one has asked, but every time I think about picking up a night shift for some extra cash, I think about those eyes and decide differently. Lewis is coming to mids next week, his rise taking a bit longer than mine, and he seems glad. It's nice being out of the darkness and the overbearing interests of the night overseer who scuttles and watches eternally.
Maybe go ahead and get an application in. It sounds like they've got openings. Coming up next, we have a man camping out in the woods who's maybe not as mindful of nature as he should be. So, let's hear about how he met the Dark Watchers.
I've been sitting on this for a little while, but I think it's time. This happened about 3 years ago. I was, without a doubt, the worst kind of hiker. You know those guys who are all leave no sign, bagging their garbage, burying their poop, cleaning up their campsite, respecting nature's natural beauty and all that? Yeah, that wasn't me. I liked camping. My parents liked camping. But there was always a mentality of the woods will take care of things. I watched my dad leave a whole cooler full of empty beer cans at the site one time when I was 8. We brought a couch with us on a camping trip one time, just because Dad knew of a ravine nearby. Broken fishing rods? Left those by the creek. Garbage? Right on the ground. Hell, we left a whole tent once because Dad couldn't get it back in the bag. We didn't use campgrounds either. Mom and Dad would pack up and find somewhere in the middle of nowhere and just live off the land for a couple of days, then leave their crap behind. I can't say that this is why I am the way I am. I know better than to litter and be a pig, but in my head, the woods will always take care of themselves. It's been here for millions of years. Why is my trash and stuff going to mess with it? If my styrofoam cooler kills a couple of trees, then they didn't deserve to be there, right? That's what I thought, at least. I go camping about 3 times a year. The start of spring, the start of summer, and the end of summer. I live in California, so I always just pack up my pickup, get some food and beer and recreational greenery, and head out to somewhere remote. A buddy of mine from work hadn't shut up about this overlook an hour from the city, right outside the Santa Lucia mountain range, and I figured I'd go crash out there for a weekend. Unlike my parents, I'm not a living off the land kind of person. I brought food, I brought stuff, and I intended to do nothing but sit in the wilderness, sleep in my hammock, and get buzzed. I called out Friday and found the perfect spot by lunchtime. It was gorgeous, overlooking the valley and so remote that if I were to get really hurt, I'd probably die out here with no one the wiser. I set up my hammock, set out my fire logs with some water, just in case, and just kind of spread out a bit. I made some lunch, sandwiches, rolled a joint, and just kind of got mellow for a bit as the day rolled on. It was nice out here, just watching the clouds and listening to nature. I was soon pretty well lit, and the sun started creeping down as I set to lighting my fire. There was probably a burn ban in effect, but I had water, and I didn't care. Out here, no one was going to see me anyway, and I started roasting hot dogs as the sun cut a fantastic line across the sky. That was the first time I noticed them. I remember looking up and whispering, "Shit," as I mistook them for rangers or cops or something. They were just silhouettes on the ridge, not far from my camp, 3 or 4 of them, and they had these wide, flat-topped hats, like park rangers or the guy on the oatmeal box. I watched them for a minute, thinking I was busted, but they just stood there. They didn't move, they didn't call out, but I know they saw me. My fire had to be visible for a ways at this height, and the longer they stayed there, the more creeped out I felt. Why were they just standing there? If they wanted me to leave, then why not tell me to leave? I didn't know, but once the sun set, I noticed they had vanished and just kept an eye peeled. I had my gun, a big old .45, so I wasn't worried, but I suddenly wished I had a tent to sleep in instead of just a hammock. I sparked up again after eating a pack of dogs, though, and that took some of the edge off. Took any thought of the shadow guys out of my mind whatsoever. I dozed off in my hammock, but I dreamed about them that night, too. I dreamed that they were in my campsite, just standing around and watching me. They were like the outlines of people, like when someone stands in front of the sun and all you get is a burnt-out image of them. They didn't have any features, no eyes or anything, and I was frozen there as they looked at me. They didn't say anything. They just watched me, and it felt like being sleep paralyzed the whole time. I woke up after dawn, almost fell out of my hammock, and started making breakfast as I stirred up the ashes of last night's fire. I wondered if it had really been a dream or not, but I felt like it must have been. Why would they come out here not to say anything? All my stuff was there too, down to the hot dog wrappers I'd left on the ground next to the fire. I tossed it in absent-mindedly and ate eggs and ham. The ice was still holding out. It was spring and not too hot yet, so I decided to go for a forest pub crawl today. Translation, I put a bunch of beer into my backpack and walked out into the woods so I could have a drunk hike. I spent about 5 hours hiking in the woods, tossing my dead soldiers into the trees as I finished them. Some of them broke, most of them didn't, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. I hiked in the woods. I never saw anything. Wasn't like I spotted someone hiding behind a tree, but it was like deep pockets of shadows that shouldn't have been there. It was midday. The sun was high, and I should have had major visibility. Even so, I found myself looking around as the crawling feeling just got worse and worse. Some of it was being drunk in the hot woods with no water, and when I found a stream, I plunged my face into it to get some clarity. I drank a little. Dad always said running water was fine to drink from, and when something snapped not far behind me, I looked up like a zebra at a watering hole. I looked around, trying to find what was stalking me, but there was nothing, just the quiet forest and the gently rushing stream. No, I didn't believe that. I'd felt like I was stalked all day, and as I watched the trees, I felt sure that something moved out there. I got up and started running, the zebra analogy too hard to break, and I kept waiting for the claws to sink into me, the teeth to bite, the hot breath to fall on my neck. It was going to come at any minute. I could feel it, and when I tripped over a fallen log, I just lay there and waited for the end. It would get me now. It would get me, and I'd be dead. I'd be dead. Nothing happened. I lay there for about 10 minutes just knowing that it would get me when I moved, but it never came. When the ants started to bite my legs, I sat up and swiped at them. I'd fallen next to an anthill, and I had accidentally stomped on it in my haste, and they were mad as hell about it. I ended up going back to the creek to wash them off, a haphazard trip that took me another 10 minutes, and I was still looking around like a scared animal. I sat with my legs in the creek until they had stopped throbbing, and then made my miserable way back to camp. It was not as much fun walking back as it had been walking out, and I was jittery and tense the whole way. The sun was starting to slip down, and I absolutely didn't want to be out here when it got dark. Too many things could be crunching around out here in the dark. I made it back to camp before it got dark, and as I cooked my dinner, the sun started to ride low again. It was more hot dogs tonight, cooked over the fire, but I couldn't finish all of them. I was too scared to look away from the ridge, and I ended up burning more than one of them. They tasted fine either way, but I had eyes only for the shadows on the ridge. They had the same wide-brimmed hats. A few of them had canes, but none of them were really people. They were like shadows, the images burned at Hiroshima, the photo negatives that sometimes get burned into old photographs. All of them at once, and none of them at all. They just stood there, watching me. They didn't move. They didn't stir. And as the sun sank, I became colder and colder. I should have gone to my truck and left, but I didn't. I made myself put it out of my mind. I convinced myself that I was just being foolish. When it got dark, I got in my hammock and tried to get comfortable, but it wouldn't come. My leg hurt. I was sunburnt. I was hungover. I was dehydrated. I was, but ultimately, I was afraid. I was afraid that when I closed my eyes, they would get me. I was afraid they would just carry me off into the night and I'd never be seen again. They would find my truck and my campsite, but never me. Maybe, I thought as I finally nodded off, someone would look up one afternoon at sunset and see me on that ridge too, just watching. I must have fallen asleep, and I like to think I dreamed what came next. I want to, but I can't convince myself that I did. I woke up and saw them standing around me. I could see them, and not just the ones in front of the fire. They were darker than the night itself somehow, and they began to creep closer to me. Crept is the wrong word, though. They slid along the ground like ghosts in some of the horror movies I'd watched as a kid. They hemmed me in, my body shaking, but my voice stuck in my throat. I didn't dare move. I didn't dare speak. And as they knelt around me, I heard whispering. It was a terrible sound, and it follows me into sleep sometimes. You come here to the womb of creation and leave your waste. You are a brainless creature, fit only to destroy things made by your betters. You burn the wood of a creature who has existed before you were more than a twinkling in your father's eye. You destroy a place that was new when this planet cooled. You throw your trash into a home shared by 100 billion organisms. And you claim to be superior here. The better. You are nothing. You will die and be forgotten. On and on and on. They whispered endlessly to me, telling me how worthless I was, how I was a nuisance and a nothing, and how I would never change. Then, one of them rose up above my hammock, his body seeming to hang over me, like a shadow cast from above. He looked like them, but he was clearly their boss or something, and when he brought the cane down on nothing but air, I heard it crack like a thunderbolt. Go back to your stinking pit, but be warned. The next time you come to our woods and ruin our place, you will not be allowed to scamper off so easily. You are a stunted thing who was taught badly, but ignorance is forgivable. If you persist in this folly, we will not be so kind again. Now go, it yelled, and I opened my eyes to find that it was morning. I was laying in my hammock, piss dribbling down my leg, and I knew that I better not be here when the sun came up. I cleaned up everything. I picked up all my garbage. I cleaned up my site. I poured water over the fire and mixed it with dirt like they had always said to on TV. Then I took everything with me, and I ran for the truck. That was Sunday, and I've been kind of afraid to leave my apartment. What if they're waiting out there for me? What if they find me slipping, or they don't like that I don't recycle or something like that? What if I offend them, and they drag me back to the woods to be punished? That's part of why I'm writing this. If you're like me, someone who doesn't care about their mess, or just leaves the woods wrecked, then watch out. Don't let the Dark Watchers catch you messing up their forest, 'cause they do more than just watch. Don't let them see you slipping, or you might find out what sort of punishment awaits those who anger them.
So always remember to pick up after yourself when you're out in nature. Coming up next, we have a story about someone who buys a new house and discovers something other than cathedral ceilings and hardwood floors. So let's hear a story about the Burbles from beyond.
We recently moved into our new house. It's perfect, just the right size for our family, but it has a strange problem with the drains. I noticed it while I was unpacking the bathroom things. I turned to discover that my husband hadn't flushed and pushed the lever to send it down the drain. When I did, I discovered that the sinks burble whenever you flush the toilet. Nothing too jarring, but it scared me a little when I first heard it. The sink burbled and bubbled, making a noise deep in the drain as it cleared the water. My husband laughed it off when I mentioned it to him. It's an old house, dear. The pipes are on the central line that feeds into the septic tank. No one has used them in a while, so it's probably just getting used to people being here again. I blew it off as a weird thing the house did and just went about my business. A week later, the drain started burbling when I took a shower, too. I overlooked it, though, not wanting to dwell on something I ultimately couldn't do anything about. This was the first place I'd lived with a septic tank. I'd always used city water, and I figured it was just something that happened when you used a septic tank. My husband barely seemed to notice it, so I assumed it was nothing out of the ordinary. After a few weeks, I'd almost come to ignore it. until the whispering started. I was brushing my teeth one night, running the water as I always did, when I heard the burbling coming from the drain again. I had bent my mouth to the stream to get a mouthful of water, when I could have sworn I heard a burbling kind of whisper coming from the drain. It was barely audible, more like a gurgle than a burble, but as I listened, it almost sounded like words. Black bank bees. Back bank bees. I turned off the water, spitting my mouthful of paste down the drain, and closed the door behind me. The burbling got worse from there on out. It didn't just bubble when the water was on. It always bubbled, loud and jarring, and I was still certain I could hear some kind of whispering. My husband just shrugged it off as normal. He was busy with work and didn't have time to indulge his flighty wife. I put up with it as best I could, but it was honestly starting to grate on my nerves a bit. I heard it in the kitchen, the living room, and especially whenever I had to go to the bathroom. The bathroom seemed to be the epicenter, and as the days progressed, I became more and more confident I could hear words amidst the gurgles. I lost my cool one night when my husband was working late. As I lay in bed, my son sleeping soundly next to me, I could hear the sink burbling and whispering from the hall bathroom. The bubbles were visible now when it burbled, deep green bubbles that sloshed up the drain and filled the sink with a stagnant water smell. Never when my husband was at home, of course, and the bastard didn't believe me when I showed him the thin film that hung on the bowl. As I lay there listening, the gurgling seemed to mock me. It seemed like only I could hear it, and the continued surge of tidal force had frazzled me. I was up before I knew what I was doing. I stomped down the hall in my pajamas, heading for the bathroom on bare feet. I was mad. I'd had enough of it, and I slammed the door open as I saw the towel rack shake ominously. I flipped on the lights like I was intending to catch the sink doing something wrong, and shouted loud enough to make my son stir and cry in his sleep. "Shut up! Shut up right now!" I screamed at the burbling sink. And, for a wonder, it did. The drain stopped burbling for a few seconds, and there was peace. Then a geyser erupted from the drain and splashed high enough to splatter the ceiling in a green fountain. It splattered the walls, pattered against the shower curtain, and caused the ceiling to rain drops of thick sludge. I'd fallen to my backside in the hallway, watching the geyser with wide eyes, when I saw something gloop out of the drain that made me scream. I scuttled across the floor, my back hitting the bedroom door, hearing my son cry out from the bedroom. I had seen the last thing I would have expected from the narrow bathroom drain, and I was certain now that I could hear something else joining it as it gurgled onto the bathroom floor. A hand of sludgy, green liquid that had pushed its way up the drain like an angry hurricane. I reached with numb fingers for the knob, the fingers refusing to find purchase as I slapped at it uneasily. I heard a gurgling thunk then, the sound of water trying to maintain a shape it was unaccustomed to, and something cast a shadow against the door. The best way I can describe it is the shadow appeared to be cast by a living jello mold. It was solid, but not transparent. It cast a watery shadow, its form undulating as it came towards the door. A single green watery hand gripped the door frame. I screamed as it lumbered into the hallway, and my grasping hand felt like a dead fish. It was 6 feet tall, bulbous and amorphous, with a shuddering bald head. Its eyes were murky green coals, and its form was a wiggling mass of barely contained fluid. The fluid was, well, it was awful. It had clearly drawn its matter from the septic tank, and the things floating within the water didn't bear thinking about. It took a single unsure step, the unstable golem shaking as it took another tottering step forward. My son was screaming now, unsure where I was, and his terror only amplified my fear. As it wobbled towards me, leaving puddles of oozing liquid on the floor, I heard the burbling voice again as it whisper wailed its words. "Back, bank, bees! Back, bank, bees!" I tried again to open the door, my eyes locked in terror on this watery monstrosity. "Back, bank, bees! Back, bank, bees!" I felt my own water puddle on the floor as my bladder let go, the creature towering over me. "Back, bank, bees!" it yelled. It leaned over me, and I could feel the stagnant drops fall onto my face. I wanted to cover my nose. It smelled like raw sewage, but I was too afraid to move. I was sure in that moment that I would never see my husband or my son again. He would return home to find me dead, maybe find our son dead too in his bed. He would see the water and always wonder what had happened to me. As this creature crouched over me, I was certain that the last thing I saw would be his terrible sewage form. It bent its watery lips to my face then, and when it whispered this time, I could hear something different. "Check. Tank. Please." The words were spoken as though they might break the creature, and they were spoken with the utmost emphasis. His speech was slushy, slurry, as though his tongue was missing. He was approximating speech, but it was still difficult to make out. I looked into those green orbs and repeated back what he had said. "Check, tank, please?" It nodded its liquid head, its featureless face almost looking relieved. Then it melted into a deluge of stagnant water, and I was covered in buckets of disgusting sewage. My husband didn't believe me. I was still cleaning up sewage when he came home, and he was utterly flabbergasted. I told him about the creature, about its final message, but he refused to believe it. It was a dream, he said. The septic tank had backflowed into the house, and I had dreamed this watery creature. We went back and forth for hours, until finally I had the solution. Open up the septic tank, then. If there's nothing there, then I'll never say another word about it. I'll deal with the gurgles and the bubbles, and I'll never say another word about anything. After another hour of arguing, he finally relented. We called a service, and they breached the lid. It wasn't too hard. The earth was removed, and the lid was removed with a little backhoe. The smell was atrocious, but the men didn't seem to mind. My husband told them that we had a problem with the tank. It flowed into the house, and they figured the valve had been stuck. I saw the pumper hose descend, and the tank was emptied. My husband said I didn't need to be there for this, but I wanted to see. As the sewage went down, I saw the operator's eyes grow large. He called his partner over, and a flashlight was found. The flashlight nearly fell into the tank when it fell across the sewage-covered lump. His partner told us that it appeared to be something in the tank, but we shouldn't worry. The house has been empty for a while. It's probably just a congealed mass or something. The operator continued to pump the tank, and as the water level fell, we saw that the lump was more than a congealed mass of waste. It was a body. The police were called. Our front yard was soon playing host to 3 squad cars, a fire truck, and an ambulance. The techs were shunted aside as the rescue team received the body from the septic tank and loaded the remains into a body bag for identification. The police asked us some questions, but had already cleared us for the most part, since the body appeared to have been there for months. The inspector had likely not breached the tank at all during the initial inspection, so the body could have been there for years if it had been sealed properly. As the bag was zipped, I got a momentary glance at him. It was large, the head bald and lumpy. It looked a little like the sewage form that had tottered over me in the hallway. Before they zipped it up, the desiccated creature's mouth lolled open, and I felt a chill run down my spine. His tongue was mangled. Since the incident, we've heard no more burbling. The septic tank hasn't sputtered, and the house has been quiet since that night. Other than the sounds of our family, of course. My husband still can't explain how I knew there was a body in the tank, but I'm just glad that there was ultimately a happy ending to the story. So next time you hear a burbling in your pipes, don't discount it as simple plumbing issues. Your house may be hearing burbles from beyond.
Maybe check your own septic tank. Make sure you don't have your own ghosts and ghoulies in there. Coming up next, we have a story about a summer home with something that lies beneath. So let's hear a story about what lies beneath the floorboards.
I hated the summer house. That's a weird thing to say, I know, but it's true. I would stay there for at least a week every year, and sometimes we would go up there for holidays. One year we spent Christmas at the cabin, and that was a miserable time indeed. The cabin, my family's summer home, sat on the edge of Lake Erie, and it was a modest 2-bedroom cabin with a loft in the eaves. It had a little kitchen, a nice living room with a fireplace, and 2 bedrooms downstairs, one for my sisters and one for me. Mom and Dad always slept in the loft, so they never saw any of the weirdness that I saw from my bed in the smaller of the 2 bedrooms. The floor of the cabin had these wide gaps between the floorboards, and it let you see the underside of the cabin. Dad always promised us that he would replace the floorboards, but he never did. They were old wood, smooth and not prone to splinters, and I guess Dad thought it was worth the occasional spider or bug coming up through the floorboards if his socks didn't get hung on the poking wood. Bugs and spiders and other kind of pests were the least of my concern, though. I didn't notice it right away, of course. The first time we stayed there, I was just amazed by the cabin. It was so cool, having a cabin all to ourselves, and I explored every room and every inch before going outside. We swam in the lake, we took our canoes out, I climbed trees and played pretend for hours. And after dinner, I fell into a deep sleep. I'm not even sure that I dreamed that first night, and I couldn't wait to do it all again the next day. As that week went on, however, I started to notice the strange noises that wafted up from beneath the floorboards. It sounded like something moving around down there, a scuffling sound that made me think of small animals or bugs. I could sometimes catch glimpses of them between the gaps in the floorboards, but they were always too quick for me to see. Dad said it was probably just rats, and that most of these old cabins had rodents living under the floorboards. He put down traps in the kitchen, not wanting to bother them if they were living under the house. The traps never caught anything, though, and Dad just kind of shrugged it off as well-behaved pests. They were well-behaved for everyone, but me, it seemed. I never felt like I did the first night again, and that scuffling beneath the boards would sometimes keep me awake all night. I would lay there, listening to them moving around, and think to myself that they sounded way too big to be mice. If they were rats, then they were big rats, and I sometimes worried that they would try to come up through the floorboards. We always had fun while we were there, but I spent my nights praying that I could get to sleep before the scrabbling noises could keep me awake. My parents bought the house when I was 4, and we went there every year until I was 12. I had a lot of time to listen and a lot of time to investigate the noises, as well as a lot of time to lie awake and be scared. When I was 10, we stayed there for 2 weeks after a storm knocked out the power at our house. Knocked out the power for the whole area, actually. The flooding caused the grid to go down, and my parents decided to stay there until things returned to normal. It was miserable. Every night I just lay there, listening to the scrabbling of whatever was under there. No matter how many pillows I put on my head, no matter how much I swam and ran and wore myself out, no matter what I did to fall asleep, it never did any good. The scratching and the scrabbling would always keep me awake, and after 8 nights straight of this, I'd had enough. It was 11 o'clock, and I growled as the scratching started again. I was tired, I was grumpy, and I had had enough. I pushed myself out of bed, coming down hard on the boards before stomping around as loud as I dared, hoping to scare them. I'd been stomping around for a couple of minutes when suddenly the noise under my feet stopped. I stood there, feeling pleased with myself as I crawled back into bed. If I'd known it would be that easy, I would have done it weeks ago. As I closed my eyes and finally dropped into something like sleep, I felt secure here for the first time since that first night. But it was short-lived. When I heard the scrabbling again, I realized it had barely been an hour. The sound was so loud that it made me think that something was trying to come through the floor. I peeked over the side of the bed and saw something pressing against the cracks. It was dark, so it was hard to tell, but through the floor cracks, I thought I saw fingers digging up through the holes in the wood. The fingers were dirty, the wood making them run with dark liquid as it cut them. But they kept pushing. I was frozen in fear, my 10-year-old mind not sure what to do, but as the floorboards groaned, I knew it would get me if I didn't do something. I reached beside the bed with a shaky hand and found the baseball bat that I had leaned there. I had been practicing. Baseball tryouts would start soon, but it was not what I imagined I'd be using it for. I took it up, leaned down, and swung at the hand with all my might. It didn't stop right away, but after a few more hard shots, it pulled its fingers back under the boards. They were probably broken, at least I hoped they were, and as I clutched the bat, I waited for them to come back again. I sat there for a while, just staring at the floor, as I watched something worse than a finger look back at me. It was a single, bloodshot eye, and it looked very human. It locked eyes with me, and I pulled back into the bed, the bat clattering to the floor. My parents came quick when I started screaming. I tried to explain it to them, tried to tell them what I had seen, but they just thought I'd been having a nightmare. Finally, they allowed me to sleep with them in the loft, and until we went home, that was where I slept. I refused to be in that room by myself, even during the day, and I wasn't bothered again that time. Wasn't the last time I saw that mad eye, though, or heard the scrabbling of all those fingers. We didn't go back the next year. Dad couldn't get his time off approved or something, and when they planned a week-long trip when I was 12, I tried to get out of it. I still had nightmares sometimes about those eyes and fingers, and I didn't want to go back. I was 12, old enough to be by myself, and if my sister hadn't tried to do the same thing, I think I'd have managed it. I even promised her that she could have my room, but she was not going for it. Mom put her foot down and said none of us were staying home, and we would all be going, and that would be that. I packed my bat, as well as a flashlight, and we set out for the lake house on the second week of July. I tried my best to wear myself out that first day. I swam for hours. I explored and hiked, and by the time night fell, I was nodding off at the dinner table. I'd run myself ragged, and I was hoping that if I didn't antagonize them, maybe they would leave me alone. By the time it was late enough to head for bed, I fell onto the little mattress and was out before my head hit the pillow. I thought I had managed it, that I had finally gotten to sleep before the scratching could start, and I slipped off as I thought that I might have finally broken the cycle. When the scratching woke me up in the wee hours, I cursed and smacked my pillow as I sat up. It was louder than ever. It sounded like an animal's claws, like nails on a chalkboard, and as I peeked over the edge of the bed, I could see something as it moved beneath the boards. It was pushing again, thrusting its fingers between the wooden slats, and when the fingertips began coming through, I felt like I was having the nightmares all over again. It pushed at the boards, warping them, bending them in odd ways, and I felt certain that it would come through the floor at any minute. Some of the fingers were bent in odd ways, the tips looking like they might have healed after I had broken them, and as I took up the bat again, I prepared to give them something to heal from again. I smashed those fingers as they tried to poke free, and as the blood ran down, they pulled them back, and the eye came back to stare at me. It was bloodshot and awful, and when I hit the floorboards, it moved away as I was left in silence. I tried to go back to sleep, but I couldn't. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind, every scrape of a tree branch, every groan of the wood that sounded like the scraping as it returned. I finally fell asleep, but it was nearly morning, and I woke up tired and groggy. I was pokey the rest of the day. My mom asked if I was feeling sick, but I assured her that I was fine. I did take a nap later, though. I wanted to be on my game when it came back that night. But I got more than I bargained for. As I sat in the middle of my bed, bat in hand and fighting sleep, I began to hear a scrabbling like I had never heard before. It was as if a beast with 1,000 fingers was crawling down there, and as it moved, it dug its nails in deep. The boards began to buck and bulge, a multitude of fingers scrabbling at the wood, and when they began to poke through, there was no way I could get them all. I swung my bat again and again, smashing fingers and breaking nails, but it was like an army was underneath the floorboards. I kept hitting them again and again, their digits snapping loudly, but the wood was starting to come up. I screamed, not for anyone, but just in general, and as they started to press up and into my room, I caught a glimpse of what was beneath. I wanted to scream, but it was stuck in my throat. I had thought it was rats at first, but then I thought maybe it was just a single person. But as I saw the eyes that looked up from the floor, I didn't know what to think. It was people, naked, skeletal thin, all of them trying to come up and out of the area beneath the floor. I counted 4, then 5, then maybe a dozen, and they were trying to pry up the floorboards. Their numbers just kept growing. How many were there under the floor? I pictured ants coming out of a hill, and the idea of that many half-starved humans pressed beneath our summer cabin made my skin crawl. I heard loud footsteps coming towards my room, and suddenly the door opened and the hall light spilled in. I thought there might be as many as a dozen. They looked up as the door came open, their eyes looking surprised as they saw him. I was shocked too, but my shock was twinged with hope as someone came to save me at long last. "What in the hell are you?" But Dad stopped as he saw what was under the floor. They saw him too, and they tried to get through the floor, but he didn't give them time. He stepped in, grabbed me, and stepped out, closing the door and putting a chair under it from the hallway. Then he woke up my sisters and took all of us up to the loft as he called the police. Then he sat up there with a pistol, something I didn't even know he owned until that moment, and waited for the police to arrive or some of the people from the floor to come out. When the police arrived, he came down to let them in, and then he came back to keep us safe. That was my dad, always a protector. Cops didn't find anything, but the pushed-up floorboards kind of helped our story. I told them how long it had been going on, what I had heard and seen, and they searched under the house and in the nearby woods before finally giving up. They found sign in the house of something moving around down there, even a screen on the side of the house that had been jimmied open, but they didn't find much else. Dad didn't tell me till I was older, but apparently the sheriff who came out to check the scene had told him a story. The lake house was so cheap enough that a working stiff like my dad could afford it because it was the site of something terrible. The last owner had gone missing suddenly. A man, a woman, 3 children, and none of them had ever been found again. They'd searched everywhere, but found neither hide nor hair of them. The only thing they did find was a pushed-up board in the room that I now stayed in. Enough boards for a small horde to squeeze in through. My parents sold the lake house after that, and we got a timeshare in North Carolina. That was a decade ago, but I still have nightmares about the people under the cabin sometimes. So if you see a cabin for sale on Lake Erie, be very cautious and do your homework. There could be more in the foundation than just the termites.
One more story for you, and I think I've got a pretty good one for us to go out on. It's a story about a man who notices a strange tree in the park with an odd fellow living inside it. So let's hear a story about the man who lived in the hollow oak tree.
None of us believed him. How could we? It was just so odd that it couldn't be true. I swear to you that it happened. I can't prove it, but I swear to you it happened. We all just kind of shook our heads, but the look on Roger's face should have been proof enough that he was serious. He just looked so haunted, like he'd seen something that would never leave him. Roger's a habitual drunk. He manages it well for work, but he's been a drunk since I met him in college. Not a social drinker, or a fun drunk either, but a hardcore alcoholic. Like I said, he keeps it under control so he can hold a job down, but from quitting time till he passes out, Roger is drunk and in his own world. The story he told us happened in the park last night. And the way he told it made me think that while he was telling it, he might be stone sober. Roger had been off that day, so, of course, he's headed straight down to McGrady's at 11, just as the other day drinkers were starting to sober up. He drank his lunch, met us for shots after Ryan and I got off work, and then left about 8 when the bartender told him to stop smacking the jukebox or get the hell out. Roger, very drunk at this point, had staggered out and gone to the park across the way. He intended to sit for a minute and wait for his head to stop spinning long enough to pick up a fresh bottle and start drinking at home. I was sitting on the bench near the little pond. You know, the one across from the hollow oak tree. I had nodded, knowing just what he was talking about. The hollow oak is kind of a landmark in the town. Guys from the agricultural college had tested it a few years ago and determined that it was 80% hollow on the inside. They were at a loss to say how it stayed in the ground, but it did, and people sometimes came to take pictures. The city had set up a little chain perimeter around it, and you weren't supposed to touch it or disturb it in any way. So I'm sitting there, watching the sun go down, and night begins to settle, when I see this guy come out of the tree. We had asked him if he meant someone had been, up in the tree or leaning against the base of the tree. But Roger just shook his head and repeated that the guy had been inside the tree. It's like he had floundered with his words for a minute before settling on, you remember when you were a kid and you played with Play-Doh? You had that thing that would squeeze the clay through a little hole and make, like, spaghetti or something? Well, it was kind of like that, except way, way worse. He said it had started with an arm. At first, Roger had just thought it might be a squirrel or a bird, but when the finger gripped the bark, he began to think he might be hallucinating. The arm pulled its way out of the knothole, and pretty soon, a pale shoulder was sticking out too. The shoulder stretched and turned, and when a head followed, Roger said he almost screamed. He was certain he was hallucinating then, sure that the sauce had finally cooked his brain, but he doubted even his mind could create something like this. The tree pushed the person out, head and shoulders, knees and toes, and the man had hit the ground on all fours like some kind of spider. He scuttled across the grass under the chain. When he got to the edge of the barrier, he started making gagging noises. As Roger watched, the man had thrown up a dozen small somethings and then scuttled to the other corner of the barricade to do it again. He had done this 3 more times, upchucking into each, and when he looked up from the 4th round, he had made eye contact with Roger. The man's face, he said, had been confused but not afraid. He was looking at something unfamiliar, and when he smiled, Roger felt his breath catch in his throat. The man's teeth were pointed like a bunch of sewing needles, and the look had been far bigger than Roger's pickled brain could understand. The smile looked painful, too big, like he could have swallowed me whole. Roger had run then, run all the way home. That's where we'd found him last night, passed out on the floor and mumbling in his sleep. I finished my coffee and told Roger that he better get ready if he wanted to ride to work. Roger said he wasn't going in today, though. He'd told the boss he didn't feel well, and I told him I'd meet him at McGrady's after work. He had shaken his head at me, mumbling about how he'd never go back in that bar again. I think I might be done with the sauce for a while, he said, his voice shaking like a leaf. I rolled my eyes and left for work, expecting I'd find him drunk when I got to the bar that night. When I got to the bar at 6 o'clock, though, he was nowhere to be seen. The bartender said he hadn't seen him all day, but asked me to remind him that his tab still needed settling. I asked a few of the regulars, and they said they hadn't seen him either, so I stepped out of McGrady's and found a familiar shape sitting in the park. I walked up to Roger and found him stone sober, sitting on the same park bench he had told me about in his story. "Have you been here all day?" I asked. Roger nodded as he stared at the tree. I had never seen Roger this way, and it kind of scared me. I'd seen him sober before, and I'd seen him drunk plenty of times. But this was different. He was like a different person, someone who's seen something he can't comprehend, and I felt sorry for whatever it was that was going on inside his head. "You were serious about that thing, weren't you?" I asked. Roger nodded, his eyes boring into the tree like he meant to melt it. I wanted to walk away, but I found myself sitting down beside him instead. My morbid curiosity had gotten the better of me, and if this creature was real, then I wanted to see it myself. So, we sat like watchers in a theater, waiting for the show to begin. It wasn't a short sit either. 6 became 7, 7 became 8, and 8 became 8:30 as we sat watching the sun sink lower and lower. It was high summer, and the days were long. Just before 8:30, the sun became a burning coal on the horizon, and the two of us tensed for what might or might not be about to happen. As the darkness settled over us, I sighed. Good one, Roger. Got me to waste my whole afternoon on this nonsense. Come on, I'll buy you a drink, and you can have a good laugh at me about how you... But he grabbed my arm then, pointing at the tree with a shaky hand. I looked back, and a long pink worm was beginning to make its way out of the knothole. It's just a worm, Roger. You got drunk and hallucinated something that scared you. I'm glad you're using it as an excuse to get sober, but don't ask me to buy into your delusion. Does that look like a worm to you? He asked, his voice shaking. I glanced back and saw that it indeed no longer resembled a worm. The one worm had become 5, and they were attached to a pale pink hand. The hand had unfurled from the hole like an alien flower, and as the wrist made its way out, I realized that the show had begun. The wrist emerged, and behind it came an arm and an elbow. The shoulder was next, and as the tree sprouted a man, I found myself unable to look away. He came slithering from the knothole, this boneless creature in human flesh. It was like watching dough being pushed through a press, and I wondered how it could possibly do this. When his head came free, it looked like nothing so much as a helium balloon being inflated. How? I gibbered, my mind refusing to understand what it was seeing. How can this be? If Roger knew, he never answered. The two of us sat mesmerized as we watched this fully grown man come slithering from a gnarled hole too small for a squirrel to fit into. He hung from the opening when it was down to his legs, a caterpillar ready to slide from his cocoon, and he hit the ground on his back before flipping over gracefully and scuttling on all fours towards the chain-link fence. When he opened his mouth, a spray of small somethings came spilling out onto the ground. They were black, looking like the smooth river stones you sometimes buy at a hobby store. He threw up about 20 of them before scuttling to the other corner. He repeated this operation 4 times, and as he opened his mouth for the 4th time, I saw the double row of pointed teeth in his oddly large mouth. He looked up after seeing us, and just as Roger had said, he smiled before scuttling back into his tree and pressing himself back into the hole. It was like watching a blow-up doll deflate in slow motion. First his arms, then his shoulders, then his head, then his legs. Before long, his feet were disappearing grotesquely back into the cramped little opening. By the time he was done, it was almost 9, and I felt as though my brain had been awake for days. That probably sounds weird, but when you see something like that, something that just doesn't make sense, your brain tries its best to make it fit into the picture of the world you know. Birds fly, fish swim, and this man compresses himself in and out of a tree so he can throw up. I stood up then, and Roger grabbed my arm. Don't do it. If you look, you won't be able to stop yourself. I pulled myself away from him, wanting to see what it was. I needed to know. Why did he come out to throw these things up? Were they bugs that were killing the tree? Were they some kind of sickness he had to keep purging? Why did this thing that defied logic come out of this tree just to throw up these whatever they were? I bent down, taking out my phone as I shone a light on the pile closest to us. I gasped. I couldn't help myself. They were acorns. Solid black acorns that were about 2 sizes too large to be a normal acorn. I reached down to pick one up, but my hand froze before I could touch it. I stood up, wiping my hand despite it having touched nothing, and offered to buy Roger a drink anyway. After what we had seen, I thought we both probably needed one. No thanks. I think I'm done with drinking for a while. Maybe you ought to come home too, he offered. We ended up heading home and just watching TV for the rest of the night. Roger hasn't had a drop of alcohol in a month, and I still find myself dreaming about that strange creature once or twice a week. It'll fade in time, but I want to get it down here so other people know. Given what happened yesterday, it's information that people might need. You see, the news reported that the hollow oak had gone. No one had seen it go, but the patrons of McCrady's had speculated that it must have been between midnight and 5 a.m. when the bar closed. Many of them had seen the old tree when they came inside, but reported that it was gone when they left at 5 a.m. after last call. But never fear, local botanists have reported that a small sapling has already sprouted in the spot its predecessor occupied. There's no evidence to suggest it might also be a hollow oak, but this reporter certainly hopes so, the man on the TV had said. I'd like to say this is where it ends, but unfortunately, there's a little more. You see, I couldn't get those strange acorns out of my head. I kept thinking about them, wondering about them. So the night before the hollow oak left, I went and watched the man as he went about his strange and disgusting ritual. Once he had gone back inside his tree, I went to the pile and took one. I put it in my jacket pocket, and now it's sitting on my desk. It seems to draw my eye, the little acorn almost appearing to beat like an infected heart. And my mind tells me to plant it in the ground. Roger told me that if I touched it, I wouldn't be able to help myself. And I guess he was right. I don't know how much longer I can stop myself from planting this thing, but I fear what might come tumbling out one night if it grows. So if the hollow oak should happen to land in your town, don't touch its strange occupant's acorns if he should come out to deposit them. I wouldn't interrupt his strange ritual either, not if I were you. The occupant seems harmless, but those teeth must be for eating something. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's story. Well, if you like tonight's story, you can thank a dream I had, because this is basically based on a dream that woke me up one night. I guess to me it was a nightmare, but everyone I've told it thinks it's a little bit funny. If you enjoyed tonight's story, maybe think about hitting that subscribe button and that notification bell so you don't miss any of our stories coming up. Let's also go ahead and thank our patrons. Thanks to Janet for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributor. Thanks to Leslie Lou Riddle and Emily Coltsfoot and Xaronan for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you too would like to support the show, come on down to Patreon. For just $5 a month, you too can get all these great rewards that my patrons enjoy. So, come on down and have a look. If you'd like to pick up my new book as well, Sleepless Nights, there's a link in the description, so come on down to Amazon and get your own copy. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.
And just like that, our stories are at an end for another day. But don't worry, we'll be back very soon with more cozy horror. Until then, this is Dr. Plague, wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.